science and you know but they also put a lot of emphasis on getting you out of that program and going to work as opposed to going on a PhD track. You can still do that if you want, but that's how a professional degree is different from say a master's of science. And so at Duke, I did a master's of it's called a master's of environmental management, or MEM, and I follow a track called conservation science and policy. And I also added a certificate, which is basically you kind of specialize on something. And I chose to do GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. So, you know, it's a very powerful tool that we use for modeling, and you know, it's very closely tied with statistics. So a lot of the statistical programs talk to the GIS, so we can run all kinds of cool things, and we can make really cool maps too, if you like maps. But yes, so and so once I graduated from Duke, I right after I graduated that summer, I received an offer from a conservation organization called the Conservation Fund. And they happen to have an office in Chapel Hill. So Chapel Hill was only 10 miles from Durham. So I ended up staying here. I worked for them for 12 years and really loved the work there. It was... I got really lucky. I never thought I would just stay here and didn't have to move or anything. But I really liked the work that we did there. The Conservation Fund is a non-advocacy group and also a non-membership group. So unlike other big environmental groups like, you know, WWF or the Nature Conservancy, they have to spend a lot of money doing advocacy work. And so I don't have anything about, you know, against advocacy. I think there's a lot of it that, you know, we need to have good advocacy campaigns, but, you know, I'm just not good at it. And I think there's people out there that are just fantastic at doing that work. And so it was a perfect fit for me to do that. So I stayed there for 12 years, did just all kinds of amazing work. And last year I decided that 12 years was just a good run, and I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do something that I could see the direct impact on the ground, and then just the climate change issue just to me seems to be the one thing that we should be putting all our money, time, energy, and effort into. And so I went to work for this company that I'm working for now, Finite Carbon, and so yeah, I'm 2 months into it, so I'm still pretty new, and yeah, so that's sort of a quick recap of my life. If you have any questions, is there anything else that you want me to talk about in terms of the you know, the journey to here?
Students, I'm going to let you take it from here.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said, students, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay. I have a question.
Okay.
So I was sort of curious about. So actually, I was super excited to talk to you because I've been thinking about a lot about carbon offsets recently, and I find that it's really difficult to sort of like. I've been looking online and stuff and looking into it because I do a lot of driving, and that doesn't feel great, obviously. And so I was wondering how sort of if you know how carbon offset like organizations or those type of things are approved, because it's sort of hard to tell like what is like legit, you know, like I don't know if my money's actually going to what they say they are, like how like, yeah, how does that work? Because I feel like it's a pretty new thing as well.
So, I think your question is about the consumer sites like TerraPass and all of that type of, um, yeah, geared towards the consumer. So, I, I think I have mixed feelings with some of those sites precisely because of what you just said. Is you don't know, you can't really trace where that money is going. And so the thing you need to know about carbon offsets is that, so for example, the company I work for, right now, we do forest carbon offsets. So every credit that we sell is generated through a reforestation or improvement in practices with forest exclusively. But carbon offsets are companies have a menu of like options, right? And they can buy carbon offsets from different developers. So probably here on the cheapest end of carbon offsets, lowest quality, are some of the carbon offsets that are coming from methane recovery projects in countries where there's really poor governance. And I want to pick on China, but unfortunately, a lot of the offsets that are coming from China are cheap, and you can buy a lot of them, but it's really hard to verify that is that they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing for multiple reasons, right? But lack of transparency continues to be an issue when you come to that. So, so that's offsets, and there are offsets. You can buy offsets from solar energy. You can buy offsets from wind energy. Um, Now there are a couple of developers that are doing soil carbon. So by doing practices when you say plant your crops, there's some ways you can do that sequester carbon rather than, for example, going and doing, disturbing the soil a lot. That actually releases a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So there's practices that you can do to minimize. So you can now buy soil carbon offsets as well. And then there's forestry carbon. And then now there's even developers that are doing like this, I don't even know, it's called something like carbon removal technology. I mean, there's this gigantic fans that somehow take the carbon out of the air, the atmosphere. I don't even know, but it works. So, and then they're generating carbon. So the menu of options that these companies have is pretty large. They can choose, how to buy those. So to the extent that you can find out where those are coming from, I think that can inform if you feel comfortable doing that. So the source of the offsets is one thing that you need to keep in mind. I think the other, the second biggest thing that you have to think about is that you're gonna pay a premium. So TerraPass, for example, I think it's like maybe $12 per ton, and $12 it's a premium price because they are they're not going on volume, right? So you may be buying like I don't know 5 tons, or I don't know how much you know an airline ticket, for example, may cost in terms of the tons, but you're not buying volume, and so you're gonna be as a consumer, as an individual, you're paying a premium for that ton of carbon, as opposed to let's say Amazon, but they may say we want to buy 2 million tons of carbon. And so they probably going to pay $3 or $4, 5, whatever, something like that.
So it works just like the grocery store. Like,
yeah.
The small can of beans, costs more per ounce than the big can.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. So, if you're okay with that, that's fine. It's just, in my brain, I think about the impact of that, and so to me, it's like, how much of an impact that is really having. I don't know because I haven't seen the data, but those are the things I think you need to keep in mind is where are the offsets coming from, and if you're able to trace them, great. You know where your money is going. Some of them will allow you to say, I only want my money to go to this specific project in Africa for more efficient cooking. So, and others won't tell you that information. So always use transparency as a pretty good filter. If you're not getting that information, you should probably question, where your money's going. But that's, there's many options out there. I don't, it's hard to say. I don't know that there's a way to say who is legit and who's not, but those are the things that I will use if I were to buy, that the consumer offsets online. I hope that helped.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure.
I have a couple of who has a question about that before we move on to another topic. Okay, I'll get to just a sec, Charlotte. So, Jazmin, I'm thinking that I'm wondering, is there a case to be made for that forest carbon offsets are the best?
Well, I'm biased, so let me just disclose that.
Yeah, but tell us your bias.
So I'll tell you my bias. I think so. I think there's I think there's an argument to be made for conserving and improving forest management. And that all the other offsets that we have available don't necessarily offer the same amount of co-benefits. So when we are preserving, if it's conservation, afforestation, reforestation, or if it's a privately held forest that is being sustainably logged, but they're doing all the practices that help sequester more carbon, all of those have a lot of co-benefits that come with, and that's not, part of the equation when we price carbon. So co-benefits are things like water quality, clean air, habitat, open space for people to, recreate. There's so many other, co-benefits that come with doing forestry offsets that, to me, it just seems like, why not do this? Why not continue to put more effort into forest offsets when it comes with all these other good things? I think some of the other offsets have their good selling points too. Like if we have to have landfills, right? They have to be capped because we have to do that. That's how at least in the United States, EPA is almost always going to require that landfill be remediated. So if that methane has to be flared anyway, why not use it for something that could, benefit the community, such as, free fuel. So I think they all have their selling points, but I am biased towards forests because I just think they're fantastic, and when it comes to conservation and preservation, it's always cheaper to conserve than to restore. And so, whenever we can do that proactively, it's always better to do it rather than later go back and say, oh, like we're gonna replant trees, but it's never gonna be the same. So that's my bias.
Very good.
They're the best. Yeah.
Charlotte, you had a question.
Yeah. Okay. So I really don't know a ton about carbon offsets, but I think I got the right idea from doing the little bit of reading before we met. So I hope this makes sense. But at finite carbon, what exactly, I guess, how exactly do the partnerships between the landowners and finite carbon work, and like what are the responsibilities for each in actually ensuring that, I guess, the amount of carbon that is being paid to be sequestered is actually happening? And like, yeah, just like how does that partnership work, and what are the responsibilities of both like the company and the landowners?
So let me explain you a couple of things about the carbon market in the United States. We have basically sort of two big buckets. One is called the compliance or the regulatory market, and that is what California is. California is the only state that has a compliance market in the United States. What that means is that if you are a business in California and you're emitting greenhouse gases, by law, you're required to offset your emissions. And so the way that works is it happens in an actual cap and trade market. And so these companies have to buy credits on a formal market. The cap and trade program, the compliance market, is extremely complex, and it's very expensive too. And so and we do about 40, to this day, we've done about 40% of the projects that are in the compliance market. So, so that those tend to be pretty large landowners, like industrial corporate owners that have, thousands to millions of acres in forest. And so that relationship comes, that probably preceded my tenure here, though, but a lot of them are actually timber companies. So, growing trees sometimes for them it's more profitable than actually cutting them. So, so that's what they're doing this basically. They commit to 100 years of project, so it's a big commitment. For a smaller landowner, 100 years is very difficult to even think about something like putting your land, which may be the only asset you have, into something tied up for 100 years. So, so tends to be pretty large landowners. Now, the process of enrolling a project again is very complicated. It takes a long time. There's a lot of boots on the ground that have to go and measure. They have to sample the forest and make all kinds of measurements about volume, height, age, species, and depth. Carbon and falling carbon. All of this stuff has to be measured. And there is a third party verifier who basically goes to the project, and we're the developer. The verifier goes and makes sure that everything we put down in the project is true, and so they're going to do their own measurements. And once the verifier verifies the project, then the credits can be issued on the market and can be sold to the different companies that are buying them. So that's the compliance market. Now there's something else called that other bucket that I was talking about, that's called the voluntary carbon market. And it's called voluntary because it's voluntary. And this is where companies are trying to do the right thing. Sometimes it's just a PR campaign. They just want to look good. Some are more authentic about it, and they really truly care about offsetting their carbon footprint. Um, and in that case, the voluntary market is where we sell. The process is still complex. There's still a lot of transactions and a lot of measurement that needs to happen on the ground. But there is more. It's wide open to more people. It's a little more flexible, but not a huge amount. And the voluntary market is for those companies. So sometimes, for example, if you go and buy like an airline ticket or rent a car, sometimes at the end they'll ask you if you want to offset your carbon, and it's like a dollar or something like that. That type of offset is coming from the voluntary market. And so the Delta or United or whatever, they're buying offsets from us to be able to offer that to you as a product. And that is what the voluntary market is. Again, there is the same amount of requirements in terms of a verifier. We have to create the project, we have to submit it, we have to do all the measurements. The verifier goes on the ground, checks that everything it's true, that the property is actually there, and then submits, his approval. We issue the credits, we sell them, we pay the landowner, and then that triggers all the stuff that needs to happen for a voluntary project. The time commitment, it's 40 years for a voluntary project as opposed to 100 years in the compliance market. So that's how those two things are different, and that's how the landowner relationship with us, basically continues to be. And they commit to 100 years or 40 years, and we have renewable contracts with them, and we continue that relationship with all the reporting that has to happen every year. And then every 5 years, there's sort of a bigger report that needs to happen as well. So we're very much, we're very much an advocate for the landowner. Because again, it's our reputation too. So, yeah. So questions. I know I just threw a lot of things at you.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Morgan, is there anything on your mind?
Yeah. So, I was thinking, I had before, we had to choose who we wanted to interview. I hadn't really heard anything about carbon offsets, and I'd never heard of them before. And I think that they're an important thing to have because it's going to be very hard to just reduce all of our carbon emissions. So it's important to implement strategies that can kind of combat it. But I'd never seen advertising or anything like that. And I was wondering how knowledge about carbon offsets is being spread, because I think it's a very essential thing for people to know about, because I think there are a lot of people that care, but they don't know how to help.
Yes, unfortunately, what you're saying is it's very true. There's a lot. There's not just lack of information. There's a lot of misinformation, and there's just a void of information as well about how this works. I wish I know how to best create an outreach campaign, or I don't even know what it needs to be called, but we need to do a lot of education. And one of the things that I'm doing right now is I'm actually going around and having group interviews with landowners because we're testing some things with them, so we're doing focus groups. And I have a science background, so I have to bring myself from that science pedestal thing that we do, and really come down to the level of what people know. And this has nothing to do with them being intelligent or not. It's just there's this a completely unknown to a lot of people. And I will give you one very specific example of, talking to a group of landowners that, they all do forestry on their land. So it's not like this is, they're have some knowledge about trees and practices and all of this. And in talking to them about carbon, and then one of them said, I still don't understand. How are you going to get the carbon out of the trees? And I was like, okay, like, like deep breath, and like, how am I going to explain this? And it's like, no, we're not touching your trees. There is nothing that will happen to them. We will not go in there with a machine or anything like that and extract the carbon out of the tree. The tree is the carbon. And so that will tell you the level and the amount of education that needs to be done on this topic. That is what we are dealing with right now. I think that because of the political environment we're in right now, it's also going to be very difficult to do, some. I guess what I'm trying to say is that is not going to come from the government at this point. And so it is going to have to happen in a different way. So one of the things that you'll see right now is that a lot of companies are basically regulating themselves. And you'll see this especially from the big oil companies. They have been begging for regulations. They want to be regulated. They know that this is a problem. And so they are making all these announcements that we're going to go net zero. And, there's a lot of PR behind those. But there's also a lot of real concern for them to do something about it because it is affecting their operations and it's affecting their profitability. And, they know that climate change is a real thing. And, some of them are, the extreme weather, the ones that have offshore oil platforms. Their actual day-to-day operations are being, impacted by some of this weather and climate. So, and flooding, that the more extreme events are all taking a toll on them. So for them, it's both a business decision and it's also, a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do for them, and it makes good PR. So I think you'll see a lot of this education that we need may end up coming actually from the oil companies. Like, how ironic is that? But you guys, I think your generation is much more educated than, say, my generation on these issues, and have, you guys, I think, have a better grasp of what are the solutions that are, that work and that we can implement pretty fast. I don't think that, I don't know that most of my friends even, I think they know what I do, but I don't think they understand what I do. So that will tell you again what the level of education they need to do. It's a huge need right now.
On that subject, Jasmine, about knowing what you do, could you just tell us a story about an awesome day or a kind of moment that was really exciting in, in your kind of daily experience in this field?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, with this company, because I've only been with them for 2 months, there's not a huge amount of stories yet, but I will tell you that, full disclosure for all of you, one of our biggest clients is BP.
Is what?
And BP, the gas company. A couple of weeks ago, BP made an announcement that they plan to be net zero by 2050, I think, or something like that. And the announcement, there was a lot of stuff going on and pretty handouts and all of that. But if you read the actual document from BP, you pretty quickly realize that what they're saying is BP is going to continue to be an energy company, but we are just not likely to be an oil company by 2050. And so they are on their way to become an energy company that is mostly non-carbon. I don't know that nuclear is a thing for them. I've not researched that. I do know that they're making heavy investments on solar and wind and perhaps other things as well. I think they may be also involved with some algae projects. But to be honest, like that to me was, it was a really nice moment, and all this, this entire year has just been so full of so many, it feels like we take one step forward and 20 backwards, and so hearing that and reading about that, I think it gave me a little bit of hope to see that a company with that level of influence at the global scale is acknowledging that we need to change things, and then they are going to change it, and they're not going to lose money. Believe me, they will continue to make money. And if the money is going to be in solar and wind, that's what they're going to do. But just happens to be the right thing to do for them, and so they're going to capitalize on that. But it's also the right thing to do for all of us, and so I hope that all the other ones follow their steps. I think they are, but I think that if anyone can make significant change, it is actually the oil companies. They have serious powers, and the ability and the money to really implement solutions that are at a scale that we need right now. So I thought that was just it gave me a little bit of hope, with still a level of healthy skepticism, because it is sticky, but we'll see. I'm just I'll take it for now. Okay.
I have a question sort of related to that and Morgan's question. I was just curious about what you think the role of carbon offsets in like combating climate change and getting to net zero emissions as like a nation or like globally, like how big of a role is carbon offsets going to play? And also, like, in 50 years, do you think it's going to be like California? Like, are there going to be regulations for companies like making them offset their carbon or stuff like that?
Yeah, so the first part of your question, I think offsets are a good way to transition um, to a low carbon economy or a just zero carbon economy. Um, I don't think I don't know that we should put all our eggs in that basket. Um, I think that could be risky. Um, hold on, the dog wants to get out of my office. Before he starts biting. He was being very good, but he started crying. And yeah, I mean, I just don't think that. I think offsets can become, if we're not careful, they can become a band-aid, right? For this big, and so we can continue to offset everything and not do anything about transitioning to a zero carbon or low carbon economy. And that's very dangerous. I think we need to be cognizant that this is to buy us time. And tell me what was the second part of your question?
I was just curious about, like, do you think they're going to become more more common? And like, do you think more states or countries will like make regulations about it?
Well, so I mean, I was just thinking about the place. So Europe, Canada, California. They all have cap and trade markets. Whether the United States will have a cap and trade program or market, we had one. It was voluntary. It was a Chicago Climate Exchange, and it was up and running for a few years. Though in 2008, 2009, with the recession, that market crashed and never recovered. I don't know if, unless our political environment changes, and that is a policy question about whether we have a regulatory market. Unless there's a change in policy, I don't see that happening. We scientists, well, I'm not science, but we science people are terrible at being persuasive. Sometimes we tend to just kind of put everything on like the doom of something as opposed to the opportunities that we have. And that's just sometimes, it's kind of a hard thing to sell to politicians. They want to be sold on how many jobs are you going to generate with that, and what should I do this? So policy is a very different animal from the work we're doing. Though I just don't, not in this administration for sure, and whatever happens in the next administration, we'll have to have a change in Congress for that to even be an option. So, yeah.
Let's play that thought out for a minute and say, okay, we have a collection here of committed young people who are present and watching this video, and they're in many states around the U.S. and in other parts of the world. Let's say that they get a chance to ask a question of a candidate or a campaign. And asking questions always kind of brings something up to the top. It's a small thing, and yet it can, and let's say they got friends to also ask questions. What would be a good question to put to somebody running for office about cap and trade? Something that forces the candidate to actually think about it and make a statement.
I think in terms of triggering something in a politician, maybe I think we need to make this about people, and not about parts per million. That's important, but that doesn't mean anything to someone who doesn't understand what that is. And we've made it all about parts per million, right? Like we've made this discussion about, oh my gosh, like we're at 350, now we're at 400, the world's gonna end, and that means nothing to people. It means nothing to politicians. We need to make this issue about people and how it's affecting people's lives and health. But I think that one of the key things that we need to make policy and politics aware of is that the impacts of climate change are the blunt of the impacts are being taken by the poorest in almost every situation. And so when we have, extreme events, when we have, I don't know, you take it, the disadvantage are the ones taking in the blunt of the impact. And so with cap and trade, for example, one question that I will ask is, how would you make sure that if we do have a cap and trade program, that the benefits of that are actually getting to those who are being impacted by climate change? So meaning, yeah, we may have this gorgeous forest in the Northwest that is sequestering gazillions of carbon, for us. But how is that getting to people in, I don't know, Louisiana, where they're losing land like every day by the food rule, like just hundreds of acres basically sink into the sea every day. Like, how is that getting to the people there in New Orleans who experience the blunt of very strong extreme tropical storms? That if you are going to implement a cap and trade program, that needs to be part of the equation. I think that will resonate with a politician, and I think it's a perfectly valid point to make. That there is an issue of equality and social justice that comes with this, and then this is not another scheme to make the richer even more rich. So I think if we make that cap and trade program about people rather than parts per million, I think we're onto something. But that's just my opinion.
Anybody have a last question? I can't see the document right now, so I'm leaving it up to you all to.
I feel like we covered a lot of what I was going to ask. So, yeah. I have one more question.
Go for it.
Sorry. So I was curious. This probably differs a lot from company to company who offer carbon credits, but how much of what, say, like BP or a big company, when they buy carbon credits, how much of that goes to the project that's offsetting, like reforestation or something like that, versus to example your company? And I'm just curious, like how carbon offset companies make money.
So In our case, most of the money is with the landowner, um, and that is just our business model, is to get the landowner the most amount of money, and then we basically keep a portion of that sale, basically. So think about it in terms of kind of like the market, the stock market, and having a broker. And then every time he's trading, he's keeping a small fee for doing that transaction. Um, that's basically is almost exactly the same. So not a huge amount of difference there. So that's how we make money.
Cool.
Well, I think that kind of gets to the end of our time, and we want to thank you very much, Jazmin Varela, for talking to us about your work. And we wish you all the best as you pursue it.
This is much fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate it. Good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.